We are back. It is your host, Isaiah. A little bit late. Sorry about that, folks. Well, welcome to a special Sunday edition, episode number 280 of the O&B Puckcast. Want to get you an episode in before this crazy schedule and Thanksgiving week and talk Flyers hockey. And know that's something we all want to talk about. We're brought to you by FlyersNittyGritty.com, Summit Adjusters, Jim South Street, and we're featured on Hockey Hot Stove, the hottest hockey forum website out there. Just go to hockeyhotstove.com, scroll down. You'll see the insignia of the O&B Puckcast, and it'll link you to all of our YouTube shows. And of course, we are streaming live today on YouTube, Facebook, and X. And for the YouTubers, if you could subscribe, if you could hit that like button, it really helps us out. And of course, hit the notification bell so you know when our next show will be, even if we are about 15 minutes late or so. Because it happens. Hey, it's live stream. The show must go on. Anyway, the Flyers have won 2-0 since our last show. They're now 11-6-3. And they have a .625 winning percentage through 20 games. So, we're at the quarter mark. So that percentage ranks them third in the Eastern Conference, eighth in the NHL. I think technically they are in a wild card spot. But if you want to play the, hey, you're in the playoffs by Thanksgiving measure, you still have to wait until after, I guess, the Florida game coming up on Wednesday. So they've shown a lot of resilience. They're 8-4-2 when the opponent scores first. And we saw that last couple of nights. 4-2-2 when trailing after one period. They're 4-5-2 even when trailing after two. 9 of their first 20 games have gone to overtime. So 45% of the games are extra time. It's crazy. And what's a lot of wear and tear. Hopefully it won't wear them down at the end of the season, but we'll see. They're 4-0 in shootouts, 2-3 in overtime. And that means they only have 5 of their 11 wins have come in regulation. Just as an example, a team right on their heels, the Penguins, has double the amount. So that's something worth watching if you want the Flyers to make the playoffs. I think most people at this point do. They've been competitive, but what they're doing right now is probably not sustainable over the long term. We'll talk a lot about that. Let's get with our panel. The great Dan Silver is overseas. And Chef B, what's your first word for tonight?
First word is, I guess it's, we're going to hear about rebuilds and we're going to talk about all that. We're in a rebuild or a retool or whatever we're calling it right now. And it's entertaining. You can't deny that these games aren't entertaining. So as far as the fan side of me says, hey, sit back and enjoy it. But, the podcaster and other things are sitting there going, well, you got to dissect this a little more because, like you said, this isn't going to be a sustainable thing. So.
Yeah, you got it. And joining us from dailyfaceoff.com, once again, we're glad to welcome Anthony DiMarco joining us from all the way up in Montreal. How are you, brother?
Not too bad, boys. How's it going? As you can, I don't know if you guys can see behind me, but winter came early here in Montreal. We've had snow on the ground for about 2 weeks.
Oh wow, great!
Wow. So what's the prognosis for today? Like how many feet or inches or whatever?
It's not a storm. Like it's kind of cooled down a lot, but we do things in centimeters here because we always have to be different, obviously, even temperature wise. But I would say there's I don't know. I would say there's maybe a couple centimeters on the ground. Like it's not full scale winter, but the snow seems here to stay. But it was a cold fall. Like you kind of felt it coming in October.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's where you're at. And you got an exciting team up there. But covering the Flyers tonight, what we're going to do, we're going to talk a little bit about the Flyers at the quarter mark, what we think of them. Then we're going to talk about what Anthony specializes in is the NHL hot stove. And right about now, Thanksgiving is when it starts really heating up. And then we're going to reassess what the Flyers have done with their rebuild in light of some of the pundits weighing in about how the Flyers operated in sharp contrast to teams like San Jose, Chicago, and Anaheim. And it should make, hopefully, for provocative discussion. Anthony, I'm going to start with you. The Flyers have hit the quarter mark, 20 games in. What do you like? What surprises you? What disappoints you? Where do you think they're headed?
Well, I mean, I think there's a lot to like. Speaking in a vacuum of just this season, obviously, we'll probably get into more of a macro discussion later in the show. But I mean, look, I think the defense has been very impressive. I thought that was going to be a bit of an issue coming into this year. I like Tockett's system. more than that of John Tortorella in terms of defending and like just giving up those low quality chances and letting the goalies make the save. I think that the system has helped a goaltender by Dan Vladar, and that's not to say that Fedotov and Urson and Kolosov were absolved the blame last year. But speaking as someone who has played very low-level hockey as a goaltender, I can tell you that when you get a lot of those low percentage saves in early, or I guess I'm not sure if that's the right verbiage, it does boost your confidence. And this is a lot of the same personnel that John Tortorella had last season, right? Like, okay, Noah Juleson comes in, who I think has been a pleasant surprise, a reasonable facsimile for the injured Rasmus Ristolainen. That was a point of concern for me, and they've been one of the better teams. Concern offense, obviously. Specifically, you look at a guy like Matvei Michkov, who you would have expected to be more of a point per game guy to this point, but I think he's slowly turning it around. I think Travis Konechny has been a disappointment as well, and you get some inconsistency from guys like Owen Tippett. You know, I don't think he's a disappointment, but Sean Couturier is just proving that he probably isn't a top 9 center in the NHL on a cup contender right now. But I mean, in terms of where they're at in the standings, I picked them to be the 8th seed in the Eastern Conference, and when all was said and done this season, and that's exactly where they're placed as of today. So it's kind of been exactly what I expected to this point.
Mm-hmm. Chef, it's interesting. Anthony mentioned about their offense, and it was interesting comment about Travis Konechny about how this is the first time he can remember where a coach has wanted a very systematic approach to offense, not just defense and neutral zone, and that it's more intricate. And like Tocchet has said in the press conferences, it's something that they've thrown a lot at the players. And it's all based on, that word we keep hearing repeated over and again, the interior and playing and getting to the front of the net. And it's more structured on the offense than it has been with most other Flyers coaches in recent memory.
Yeah, well, and if you look right now, it's even producing, results, even though players like Ant said, Tippett and Konechny have been disappointing, but like nothing for nothing. There were 4 or 5 chances last night in that game where TK should have had a goal. I mean, he just missed it. The puck rolled on or whatever, so, and same thing with Tippett. There was a couple games ago, he missed an empty net on one, and then he hit a post several times. It's not like this system that they're in now isn't giving them the chances. They just need to bury it more. And I think the more they get accustomed to the system, I think we'll see more of our, the ones, the goal scorers that we should be scoring will be scoring, I think. It's just going to take a little bit longer, I think.
Mm-hmm. I mean, even through 20 games, Travis Konechny, even with only 5 goals, still has 12 assists and 17 points. It's not horrendous. If you say, well, TK's off to a horrible start, and 17 points in 20 games, well, it's not horrible, and goal scorers are streaky. So, I mean, it's recoverable. But I have noticed a lot of confusion in TK's play, and Anthony seems to pass up a lot of prime opportunities. He's had problems with puck management. I hate to just pick on this particular player, but this is year number 1 of that big contract.
Yeah, and let's be real, guys. Aside from that very hot start that he had to the 1920 season, TK's only really excelled under John Tortorella. He wasn't particularly explosive under Hackstall or Mike Yeo or Alain Vigneault. And now you get Rick Tocchet, who's more of a systematic offense. And John Tortorella was very much about capitalizing off of turnovers and rush chances. And I forget who pointed this out to me. I don't know if it was just a Twitter reply or a private conversation, so my apologies. But it's he was very much like the Flyers version of Cam Atkinson when Cam Atkinson was producing 30 goals a year or whatever under John Tortorella. And look, I've always likened Travis Konechny to probably a more skilled version of Brendan Gallagher in Montreal. And I just the contract, it's for the first year, but let's be real, in 2-3 years time, $8.75 million, that's going to be what, an average second liner salary, more or less.
Probably. Yeah.
So right now I would view Travis Konechny as a second line forward. And that's more or less what he's going to be paid as for the majority of that contract. So, and I think we also have to shift our view of what Travis Konechny means to this team. That, like, for the past several years, he was the guy, right? Under John Tortorella, he was the dynamic offensive player. But now I would argue that Tyson Foerster is a more dynamic offensive player than him. I would argue that Matvei Michkov is. I would argue that Trevor Zegras is. And I would say the three players I just mentioned will be the three of the top four forwards in the top six for the foreseeable future, assuming none of them gets traded. So, I mean, if Travis Konechny is your worst top six winger, I don't think it's the end of the world because of what he's being paid to do. I think we're just trying to change our perspective on what Travis Konechny is going to mean for this team from here on out.
Yeah, Chef, before you chime in, the one thing Konechny has over everybody else that you mentioned, except Zegras, is that he can play at a certain pace the others can't. And
Yes.
I think he does have the hockey sense that not quite that Zegras does. I think Zegras has the highest offensive IQ on the team. But I would give TK credit for that. Chef?
I was going to ask Ant, I mean, in regards to this team scoring, we've seen it's been difficult, but if you look down the lineup, they got like 10 guys that are in double digits in points, which isn't a bad thing. They're spreading it out. You compare it to other teams that are in front of them in the standings, at least, and they're around 8, 7 to 9 or whatever. But is that a surprise for this team to have it spread out so much and to be at this point? I hate to say it, but they're consistently, especially the Cates line, it's just consistently producing.
It's not surprising, Chef, because, like, maybe with the exception of Rodrigo Abols, I think that their bottom six is capable of winning a Stanley Cup. Like, if you transferred the Flyers' bottom six onto, let's say, I don't know, who's like the biggest cup contender right now, if you guys had to pick.
Colorado.
If you put the Flyers' bottom six on the Avalanche, even with Rodrigo Abols, although I think that they would ideally want an upgrade at fourth line center. Honestly speaking, Ryan Poehling would be the perfect guy to be their fourth line center right now.
Yeah.
Funny enough, but I think they have a top six that's capable of winning a Stanley Cup. I honestly would argue that they probably have a middle six that is right there. Let's be honest, guys. Their problem is that they have one player right now who has consistently performed as a top-line forward, and it's Trevor Zegras. That's, in my opinion. Michkov hasn't done it consistently enough. They don't have a centerman who probably belongs in any team's top six. But their bottom six is as good as any, I would say, in the NHL. Like, Foerster, Cates, Brink, like, I would argue that's like one of the best third lines in the NHL if they're being deployed as such. So no, Chef, it doesn't surprise me that they've gotten so much offense by committee, because coming into this season, look, I thought that they would get more consistent offense out of guys like Konechny and Matvei Michkov, but I always thought that their depth was going to be one of their strong points up front specifically.
Now, in particular to Michkov, is it the sophomore slump? Are teams figuring him out? It looks like they're able to shut him down in some games, and basically it looks like a lot of teams' game plans are like to get them all scrappy and fired up, clutch and grab, really hit them, check them. But it doesn't seem. In fact, I think even Bush said it in last time. That's the games where he seems to excel at. Is that something you guys notice as well too?
I'm not really super worried about Matvei Michkov right now, because for me, and this isn't inside information because all my sources have been very coy about the whole thing, as you'd expect them to be, even when talking to someone like me off the record. But the guy is 20 years old. He's a sophomore in the NHL. He was in Russia. He hasn't had the most easy personal life, and he probably got pretty fat partying all over the summer. And he could be a bit of a jerk sometimes. And it's like, yeah, that kind of makes sense. Like, breaking news, 20-year-old Russian player is a bit of an asshole sometimes. You know, like, for me, it's like, it's not like this big, like, condemning, like, oh my God, like, imagine that. Like, We knew this. Like, I've spoken to other teams who are just like, oh, like, is he being a bit of a jerk off that we all knew that he had the potential to be? Yeah, maybe he is. I think Charlie has spoken about it where like the language barrier probably doesn't help as much, or like, yeah, maybe he did come in fat. Like, I got fat over the last few months and I have to lose some weight. Like, I mean, you're not always going, and obviously I'm making light of it, but I don't think, I'm not prepared to just sound the alarm right now, because like he's also a forward who is not playing with a like top 6 capable center. And I will say that I haven't been the biggest fan of how Rick Tocchet has used him, like this like Couturier tag team with Michkov. I can't stand, but maybe it's just because I just hate watching Sean Couturier play hockey at this point. But I mean, I don't think he's been put into the best position to succeed. And I also think it's coupled with he probably didn't show up in the best shape. And maybe there is a sophomore slump, but I'm just so not at the point of ready to sound the alarm bells, because you've already slowly started to see things turn around.
Yeah, the other thing I think with Michkov is the fact that he was compared to Bedard. He outplayed Bedard when they were younger, and things change, of course. But Bedard came back. He was young and hungry, and he's shown this year. He really, really trained, okay? And he improved. He's stronger. He's playing better than he's ever had, and he's taken his assets, his shot, his vision to another level, where Michkov just has kind of fallen off. So I think it's the contrast with the narrative of a parallel track, or supposedly parallel track, of two players. Obviously, that's not the case. So that can be corrected the rest of this season, or it might wait till next year. I know one thing with that particular player is the foot speed has just got to improve. Because right now, whether it's conditioning or not, he has to be able to gain an extra, at least half step over what he was at his very best.
Yeah, for sure. And like, and you know what? Like, it probably was an unfair comparison, but like, Bedard also does have an extra year in the NHL under his belt. And look, it was this time last year where I had like league executives telling me like, man, is Bedard a winger in the NHL? Did they draft Frondel to be Bedard's long-term winger? Like, people were really down on Connor Bedard last year, and that was his sophomore season. And we know that the year that Michkov spent in the KHL, which was Bedard's rookie year in the NHL, he probably didn't develop a whole lot. Like, this is probably the only second year where he's playing like professional, healthy environment hockey. So like, look, if we're having the same conversation in a year from now, then yeah, then we could start asking serious questions about how are the Flyers handling him? How is his personal mentality? How serious is he as an athlete? But if I look at it in terms of their NHL trajectories, last year at this time, everyone was like, is Bedard a bust? Is Celebrini better? Which he may be, but like, I just remember everyone freaking out, and now Bedard is God's gift to hockey, which he pretty much is, but let's just give it the rest of the season and see what happens after the sophomore slump, because there is a reason why sophomore slump is a thing. It didn't just get coined out of midair. I'm not ready to be hyperbolic about Michkov, because I've just seen this story so many times in the past.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So let's move to the defense. And, like you were saying in your general statement, Anthony, that you were pretty pleased. You thought this could really be an area of weakness. And I guess you could really say with the improvement of play with Drysdale, York with resurgence, Sanheim keeping his level, and yeoman work by Noah Juleson, and now with the emergence of Emile Andre, it's a fairly good defense. It's waiting for a big upgrade. We'll get into that. But what's your overall assessment?
I think that they're playing really sound fundamental hockey, and they're not wasting energy, to be honest. That's my biggest thing is that I see is I think John Tortorella, when he first showed up, they had to play defense the way that he structured it, because they didn't have talent. You had Provorov, D'Angelo, Sanheim, and the old version of Rasmus Ristolainen. Like, it was a mess. It was a disaster. And then you couple in with the fact that their forwards paled in comparison skill-wise to what they are now. So when you don't have skill, you have to defend. And and play offense based on pure effort. And everything about the way John Tortorella coached this team was effort-based. But when you give a lot of effort, oftentimes you waste energy. So you're throwing yourself in front of shots, you're blocking everything, you're always exhausted, you're sore, you're this and you're that. And then when you do get the puck, like, look, I would say that Ivan Provorov is a probably overall better defenseman than Nick Seeler is. But because of the way that Provorov was being deployed, over-deployed, bad partner, and all that, he looked like a bag of junk when he did get the puck because he was probably exhausted. They have developed Jamie Drysdale into in my mind, a rock-solid second-pairing defenseman. I think Cam York and Travis Sanheim are fringe top-pair defensemen in the NHL. Probably low-end 2, high-end 3s. Maybe Sanheim is a slam-dunk number 2. And Nick Seeler has blossomed into probably like a 4 or 5. So it's not that the body's changed or everything, or all these guys got drastically better at once, because Drysdale did develop under Tortorella and Bradshaw. Even though Tortorella hated Cam York because of how stoic Cam York was, they did develop him primarily under Shaw and Tortorella. Travis Sanheim was a average second pair defenseman pre-John Tortorella. John Tortorella basically beat him over the head with a club, and now all of a sudden he's a Team Canada level defenseman. So John Tortorella did what he had to do, but he didn't adapt his system enough, unfortunately. And I think what I've seen out of Rick Tocchet is he's now playing a defensive system that is more akin to what you want from skilled defensemen. And for me, that's the thing I've been the most impressed with, is that they're playing defense like they have quality bodies back there. Because to be honest, guys, they do. They have a quality top 4 group, not like top tier or whatever, but I think they have 4 guys who are completely formidable in their current roles.
Mm-hmm. Chef?
So, Andre, it seems like his last 3 games here, he's making 3-4 games. He might be making like his case to stay up, and well, he is, in my opinion. So, where does that put him? Can we finally put the rest? I mean, and it looks like he's, he's by all means of what Talk said, he's going to be around for a while. Can we finally put to bed this whole, bigger defensive guys thing, especially with his height, his size, and same with, like, I guess with Drysdale and York too. They're not the biggest guys.
I think as long as he is on, like, in the organization, he will be a regular in the NHL with the Flyers, as he should be. Because, Andre and Juleson have played like a really quality third pair. And then when Ristolainen comes back, which is presumably a better version of Noah Juleson and is theoretically and stylistically the perfect type of partner for a guy like Emile Andre, it'll be an even better third pair. I don't think this means that he is long for Philadelphia, because the better Andre plays, the more that, he has trade value in the NHL. I think that York and Drysdale are just going to be perpetually ahead of Emile Andre on the organizational depth chart, and I wouldn't blame them for structuring it as such. And I do agree that if you want to be a cup contender, right now I don't think it's as paramount, but if you want to be a cup contender, you can't have that many small bodies on your roster. I think that you won't see him back with the Phantoms. I don't think you'll see Ginning or Zamula above him or playing over him ever again. At least I hope not, but everything I've heard and everything we've seen will suggest that. But I don't think it takes away the possibility that we will potentially see Andre moved out the door at some time in the future.
Mm-hmm. And I think, we can discuss the future of some of these guys as we look at their rebuild and things like that. And some of it might also be in our rumor section. Finish off with the goaltenders. It's pretty clear, Anthony, that Dan Vladar is the man. He's clearly outplayed. We saw the other guys, particularly Sam Ersson. I guess Kolosov just came up because Ersson got hurt yet again, and that's a concern. With a guy like Ersson, he's great in shootouts, but he's less than mediocre. Outside of that, and I know Charlie O'Connor just had a whole article about his the faith that they have in him and where he stands statistically in terms of he's actually faced more difficult chances of Vladar. But I mean, just last night when the Flyers fell behind, and then they went one to Rob versus New Jersey. New Jersey won the Corsi battle. They won the expected goal battle. And you can add to the total almost 2 goals to the goals saved above expectation to the total of Dan Vladar, who's probably like 6.5 or 7 by now, if you go to Money Puck or someplace like that. So
I think he's 10th.
Okay. Yeah, it
I
depends.
believe he's 10th in goals saved above expected per 60.
Oh, he's ranked 10th.
Yeah, he's ranked 10th. Sorry.
Ranked 10th. No, I was actually going with the raw number, like how many goals.
My apologies.
No, that's right. No problem. But the thing is, it's good. How are you going to manage with this crazy schedule? Is it going to be like 1 every 3 for Ersan, or what do you think? And what's your general impression of the performances so far?
Well, look, I'm not very surprised that Dan Vladar is emerged as the starter. I didn't think he'd be this good, but I did think that he would be the starter because I think we've seen this so many times recently, most notably with the Canadians with Sam Montembeault and the Leafs with Anthony Stolarz. Now, both have fallen off of the cliff this year, but I just think goaltending, aside from like those top 5 or 6 guys, it's so volatile in the NHL. And Vladar has always been buried behind a slam dunk starter, whether it was Tuukka Rask, Jacob Markstrom, Dustin Wolf. And then you look at his size, you look at his skill set, and he was always like a top end backup goaltender. As for Sam Ersson, look, I didn't catch what Charlie wrote, but I wrote an article last Monday where I reported that they were not ready to give up on Sam Ersson. And they still do have faith in him because of that. He's a battler and he can make big saves and he is well liked in the room. That doesn't mean that they are going to just have him as the backup goalie indefinitely. I think what it means is just what has been echoed to me going back to the spring of 2024 when they signed Fedotov to 2 years. Kolosov was brought over with 2 years left on his ELC, and Ersson was signed to a 2-year extension. They thought that from 2024 to 2026, this 2-season window, they were going to figure out what they have in Fedotov, Kolosov, and Ersson. And they were going to ride it out with what they have. We already got an answer to the Fedotov experiment, so he's out. I think we're starting to see what the picture is between Ersson and Kolosov. I think that nothing is going to change between now and the end of the season in terms of their goaltending. I don't think that they're going to go out and trade for a backup goaltender. I don't think that they're going to waive Sam Ersson in favor of Alexei Kolosov because they like how the latter has been developing down in Lehigh Valley. But just because that they're willing to ride out the season for Ersson, it doesn't mean that he is the guy. And I think this is where a lot of people speak out both sides of their mouth, where you have a lot of people saying they're rebuilding, play the younger guys. Who cares about this season? But then they're just but they want to see what they have with Sam Ersson for the duration of the year. They're just oh my God, why don't you trade for Alex Lyon? What are you doing? Waive this piece of garbage. They're willing to ride out the season to figure out what they have. And I think it would be malpractice to call up Alexei Kolosov and waive Sam Ersson because he probably would get claimed. And then you're left with Bjarnason. You have to go out. And I don't think that Ersson has been bad enough from a result standpoint to risk hampering the development of Alexei Kolosov, because I didn't write this in my story, but they have said to me several times that Alexei Kolosov is doing what he should have done last year development-wise. And you're seeing the benefits of that. So why are you going to risk a guy who has the potential to be maybe a quality NHL goaltender just because Ersson hasn't been good enough? And he hasn't. But from a results standpoint, he's still gotten 8 of a possible 12 points as a backup goaltender. So as of this point in time, they're finding ways to win with Sam Ersson. So why are you going to hamper the development of a goalie who maybe has a long-term potential just in the name? If they were losing every game with Sam Ersson, then maybe it's at more of a critical point. But at the end of the day, a win is a win is a win, and they're finding ways to win with Sam Ersson. So between now and the end of the season, I don't think that there should be any urgency to replace Sam Ersson as backup goaltender.
Gotcha. Chef, we need to take a break. I just wanted to remind people that if they have home damage, that they should call Summit Adjusters. Especially if you live in PA, New Jersey, or Delaware, if you could remind the folks about why they should call Summit instead of just picking up the phone and calling their insurance company.
Well, you heard Anthony at the beginning of the show. Winter is not coming. It is here. And, not to get all Game of Thrones on everything. So winter is coming. It's here. So what you want, you got these high winds, these cold air, all this stuff. You want to make sure that you have the experts come in and make sure that they come in, they represent you, they get you the most money for your repairs. If you look at it, the big insurance companies, they're out to protect their interests. You need to protect yours. So you should call Summit Adjusters, 215-752-0560. Those guys will come out. They'll make sure that, that you are protected against the big bad insurance company. All right. And again, that number is 215-752-0560.
Yep. And before we return, we're going to talk about the hot stove heating up now that Thanksgiving week is here. Just a reminder about Jim's South Street, 400 South Street in Philadelphia. 40 years of the best cheesesteaks, hoagies, and fries in the grandest Philadelphia tradition. You know you want one. And if you're down there, check them out. If you've lived near there, you got to use Uber Eats or DoorDash, whatever it takes to get that delicious food right to your door. So remember, Jim South Street, 400 South Street in Philadelphia. And, I'm going to be in Philly this week, and I'll see if I can get down there. Anyway, and it's that time of year. I'm not saying trades are going to go wild after this week, but it does start heating up this time of year. Maybe you could give me kind of like a league-wide perspective if there are any particular rumors or teams that are kind of looking or anybody like that. And then, of course, we'll hone in on the Philadelphia Flyers.
Well, I think the parity in the NHL has caused a very stagnant trade market. I think that Bill Guerin and the Minnesota Wild are always a team that are chomping at the bit to make a move, whether that be Marco Rossi or moving off of a guy like Ryan Hartman to go out and get a top six center or get some offensive depth there. I think that's a team to look at. The Toronto Maple Leafs are fascinating, because, you have no more Mitch Marner. Austin Matthews is injured again. You look at their defense that's brutalized with Chris Tanev, Brandon Carlo, and now Jake McCabe on the shelf. So I'm looking at the Toronto Maple Leafs and I'm saying, are they going to pull a Boston like they did last year and just punt on this season and try and reload on their assets? Because Brad Treliving had one of the worst trade deadlines I've ever seen last year. To be honest with you, he gets ripped off by Danny Briere. He gets ripped off by not Bruce Cassidy, Don Sweeney. You give up 2 first-round picks, Nikia Grabenkin and Fraser Minton, for Brandon Carlo and Scott Lawton. And then they're shocked that Scott Lawton is nothing more than a 4C or a third-line winger. And I'm just like, I have pro scouts? I don't know. But anyway, they're a team that to me is fascinating to see if they do try and punt on this season. They obviously have new leadership at the top. It's not the Shanna plan anymore. They're overseen by Keith Pelly, the new chairman and CEO of MLSE. And then the Calgary Flames, obviously, they're that one team that from the jump this season has been the seller. What's going to happen with Nazem Kadri? What's going to happen with Rasmus Andersson? I've heard some whispers about Farabee and Frost, which again, brutal, great trade for Danny Briere, but I still can't believe that the Flames, they essentially got them for nothing, more or less just a second round pick, because Mango, Peltier, 7th rounder, didn't really mean a whole lot. But I mean, for me, it's mostly that Farabee contract. That's the bad one there. But those are the 3 teams that I've kind of kept an eye on. I would say the Buffalo Sabres, they just got a win today against the Carolina Hurricanes. But, I mean, it just seems that Kevin Adams is going to forge ahead with what he has. He's been repeatedly described to me as gun-shy because he's terrified to make a trade, which makes sense because every trade he does make blows up in his face. So, I mean, but it just feels like Buffalo's just going to forge ahead and just drive this thing into the ground because, look, they're probably not as bad as, the standings should show or as the standings show because of – just the overall parity and strength of the Eastern Conference. But I mean, if there was any way that team could kind of see the forest through the trees and realize that it just isn't working, that the sum of their parts is not good or does not match that of the individual talent, I think they would be a fascinating team to see, because for the Flyers in particular, they have several players that make a lot of sense for them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there was a item on in the written 32 thoughts about Flyers looking for a center. Actually, it was in one of the podcasts, but they were talking about like a lower line, third or fourth line center. Because Abels is actually a pretty good winger, for a fourth line winger. Like he'd probably be better on that line than Deloria. It's not saying much, but I'm thinking, why would the Flyers want to do that? They have Carson Dorwart. They wait like another month or so. Maybe he's ready to step in. He's got some speed, some hockey smarts. They really need to. I mean, with the free agent market, I don't want to dip into too much what we're going to talk about just in terms of the rebuild. It just seems like they should aim a little higher. If they don't think Zegras is, I mean, it's pretty clear. I guess we got to get into discussion. It's part of the strategy. If they're looking for a center, they're and I've heard, and Cervalli hears this, that more or less they don't think he's the winger. They might give it like the college try, but they're going to be looking for a center one way or another, if not during the season, the off season, what have you. And that affects
Yeah, like, look, I've asked about, because I had heard like through the grapevine about the depth center, and what my most significant source told me was just like, yeah, ideally, but we have bigger things to worry about than a fourth line center. So I think two things can be true, where it's just like, yeah, in an ideal world, you want a formidable 4C, but they're also not like just like breaking the phone down and like Jones and Briere running around the office trying to find a fourth line center. Like, you know what I mean? So I think that sometimes like you report what you hear in this business, obviously, but it's also like it takes the context out. Because if you get a text that says, yeah, I think we're in the market for a fourth line center, and you just say, hearing the Flyers are looking for a fourth line center, people could literally be like, take that and like, I guess, dramatize it to any level. Mm-hmm. Like if the Flyers were actually just like in this complete hyperbolic state to add a 4C, wouldn't they have signed David Kampf to a $3 million a year contract? Like David Kampf is a quality fourth line center in the NHL. And I do think that's a player that they have interest in, but it just shows that for what he went for, I believe, $1.25 million to the Vancouver Canucks, they're not making this a paramount thing. And like, let's be honest, you're right. Like Grabankin clearly doesn't have the full confidence of Rick Tocchet. I think Deslauriers adds some things, but coupled with Hathaway and Abels, it's a below level fourth line. But yeah, Abels is a good bottom line winger. And if you put, let's say, a Ryan Poehling between these two guys, that would be a pretty good fourth line, I would say. So I don't think it's a bad thing that they're looking for a fourth line center. Like, but is it like the most pressing issue that they have? No. I think we're just hearing about that because, okay, we're looking for a top line center. Half the league is looking for centers right now. Literally half the league. Like I had a story on Friday that talked about, how the Devils are looking for a third line center to insulate Jack Hughes and Nico Hischier. But I was asking other league executives and everyone was saying like, yeah, everyone's looking for centers. And you're also waiting for some teams to finally kind of wave that white flag. Okay, you have Calgary who has Kadri. And now if it continues to go sideways for St. Louis, you have Braden Shen, maybe Jordan Kyrou. But is Jordan Kyrou more of a winger? Because he seems to be kind of like a Trevor Zegras of sorts, is more of a hybrid type of guy.
Yeah.
So between you and me, guys, like you basically have Kadri and Braden Shen, and depending on what happens with Nashville, Ryan O'Reilly. Those are the three guys that right now could qualify as top six centers that could be available. Are any of these guys what the Flyers need? I would say no. But so that's why I think we don't hear like Flyers looking for a top six center, because there's just no one that's pretty available at this moment.
Yeah, I think the thing with Ryan O'Reilly, like he would fit very nicely in the lineup, but the cost for where they're at would probably be prohibitive. Chef, you got a point there.
So my question would be, now since we're talking about possible centers here and there, and maybe what Zegras isn't. And with the free agent market slowly drying up because everybody's signing their guys early, do we think that the peak trading season is going to be before the Olympics, or because that was a really short window after it?
I think it just depends on how the parity shakes out in the NHL. Because for a team like, let's say, the Buffalo Sabres, right? They are going to hang on to the false reality of themselves being on the cusp of the playoffs for as long as they can. Because the owner seems to be somewhat hands-off because he's justifiably so, probably more involved with the Buffalo Bills. And Kevin Adams has been there for, 5.5 years? And you could be sure that he's going to do everything in his power to avoid admitting that this is a rebuild. And if it is a rebuild, I would venture to guess that Kevin Adams will not be the one driving the bus and making some very tough decisions as far as that roster goes. So I just think that we need to see how some teams shake out, like the Toronto Maple Leafs, for instance. Like, is there going to be a point where Brad Treliving says, okay, we don't have a first or second round pick this year. We don't have a first round pick next year. And aside from Easton Cowan, who's already on our roster, and the defenseman Danford, we have nothing coming in terms of significant prospects. Like, is that a team that I personally think would be best served to punt on this season, recoup? And now if all of a sudden that they're punting on this season, they don't have a center to offer up, but that's a team that could have some interesting pieces between now and the deadline. I think it just depends, Chef, how long it takes for certain teams to kind of wave that white flag and accept reality. And I just related to the Boston Bruins of last season. That was a team that was coming off of, several years of impressive results. And at a drop of a dime, you had Don Sweeney say, okay, we got to flip this thing over. And you trade Brad Marchand, you trade Charlie Coyle, you trade Brandon Carlo, you trade Justin Brazeau. And all of a sudden, you look at the Bruins lineup and it's filled with players that they got back for as returns, like Kuznetsov and Fraser Minton. You got several first-round picks in return. You have William Zellers playing in the NCAA. So for me, it's just about, will we get to that point with several teams that are fighting off that hope that they could turn things around this season?
Yeah, that's certainly a seller's market, that's for sure. So it'll be interesting. I think we probably all agree, as much as the Flyers center position has been a weak spot, it was improved enough with Dvorak. You still have that hybrid arrangement possible with Zegras, and it's certainly better than it was last year. What they can't hide, though, is they don't have that alpha dog on defense.
Yeah.
And I guess the question becomes, are they going to try and add maybe like a Sanheim level defenseman or higher at some point during this season? Or is this, again, going to have to be another thing where they're going to have to wait till the summer? But obviously, it won't be UFA. There's no unrestricted free agents anymore.
Yeah. So, look, theoretically up front, it obviously depends what you think Jet Luchenko and Jack Nesbitt will be, because obviously some people get very angry when you suggest that they're going to be anything more than a fringe fourth liner. But let's say, what's the most realistic scenario, that both of them are like second line centers? Let's say, is that
like 2.5. It's like one's more offensive, one's more defensive. Maybe. The only thing is Nesbitt is he's a bit of a project. He might be like 3 years before he can be a staple in the lineup. But maybe he's like a Hanzus, and maybe Luchenko is kind of like a poor man's Adam Oates. So instead of scoring 100 points and being a reverse Cy Young, he'll have like maybe 12 goals and 40 assists, 50 assists.
Yeah. So let's just say those guys hit at being 2.5 Cs, and you have Noah Cates, who, could we agree, is probably one of the better 3 Cs in the NHL. Could we agree on that?
Absolutely.
Okay. If that is their 1, 2, 3, and Zegras is a point per game player, Michkov is a 100-point player, let's say Forster's a 30-30 player, and TK stays as like a 50-60 player, that could probably make it work, that as their center down the middle. Because, like, look, obviously Jonathan Toews is Jonathan Toews, but their center depth was never overly impressive in Chicago. Like, their second line center when they beat the Flyers the first year was Patrick Sharp, who was a winger. Their third line center was Dave Bolin. The last year that they won it was Brad Richards and I believe Michael Hanzus. Speaking of which, look, and obviously Taves is Taves, but Jonathan Taves, I never thought was elite offensively. Like, they were very much so driven by wingers, Marian Hossa, Patrick Sharp, Patrick Kane. Now, look, I'm not comparing the Flyers now to, and I just see a comment, Porter Martone. Exactly. That's a great point. So if you have like top 6 centers, and let's say Konechny goes down to the third line eventually. So you have a third line, and we're talking like 2-3 years down the line here. And this is assuming for no trades. You have a third line of Bump, Cates, and Konechny. And you have a top line of, let's say, Martone, Nesbitt, and Michkov, and a second line of, I don't know, Zegras, Luchenko, and Forster. Like, even if Nesbitt and Luchenko are 2.5 centers, like, is that winger group maybe not good enough to still make them a top-end team? Because if Martone is what we think he might be, and Michkov is, and Zegras is, and Forster is, and these aren't just like hoping on like hopes and dreams. These are what we've seen from Zegras and Michkov and Forster and Martone, what he's doing. I think that there is an in-house possibility to just continue on ahead, and it could work out with what they have. Defense is different because Bonk aside, I don't know if they have a defenseman in their pipeline aside from what they have on their current roster that could be anything more than a third pairing guy. And I think they know that. Like, what they have in their top 4 right now, aside from an outside addition, will be their top 4 for the next 2 years. So I absolutely think, Isaiah, that they know that they need specifically a left shot defenseman to presumably pair with Jamie Drysdale. Because do you think that Drysdale could be a top pairing defenseman if he's paired beside an alpha dog like Erasmus Dahlin, hypothetically?
I don't think that would be ideal. I think he's more of a second pairing guy.
Yeah. So for me, it was like, I was actually talking about this with Charlie O'Connor, we were spitballing the other day. And I said, if you got a Dahlin, because obviously I think stylistically, he's exactly what they need. Like, would you pair him with a Sanheim to just make this stud top pair? And he said, no, I would rather put Sanheim and York as the second pair, like they did with Kimmo Timonen when they got Chris Pronger. Because, guys, I hated Matt Carle before and after Chris Pronger. Pre-Chris Pronger, hated Matt Carle. Post-Chris Pronger, hated Matt Carle. But he was a damn solid top pair defenseman aside from Matt Carle. I mean, beside Chris Pronger. So I'm saying, like, if you got a Dahlin, could that be a solid top pair? And then you have a shutdown second pair of York and Sanheim. So again, he's not on the block from everything I've heard. This is just me kind of like will this into existence. But I think that you could just objectively evaluate things, and their situation on defense long-term is not equal to that on offense. Because even if you just stay the course with what you have defensively, there's nothing really coming. And I think that there's a very good possibility that between now and next season, Oliver Bonk is your third pairing right shot guy, and they move off of Rasmus Ristolainen if he can just basically prove to be healthy. And I think that Bonk could be like an in-house replacement for Ristolainen. But I think that they very much know that they sorely need a top pairing left shot guy.
Okay, Chef.
So if you spitballing per se, if you could look around the league and maybe guess at what might be available or what could be available, what is the best option for the Flyers? Because I've always said that because when we've had previous shows, same idea of what you said. Like there's teams that have won the cup with like a whole bunch of number 2 centers and maybe a number 3 center instead of all that. And Vegas being one of them at the time. But so who would be around the league that you could say that might be able to fill that role, or what, what's available? What are you hearing?
Are you talking about defensively, Chef?
Yeah.
Well, like
because the number one D is obviously more important to this team right now than a 1C, because quite frankly, if I look around the league, there's only 8 or 9 of them anyway. And they're pretty much parked where they're going to go. So you're going to have to be like, 15 other teams in the league and have a really good number 2 in there eventually. But the D is where you got to go, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree, because you could at least reason with the potential that they have enough in-house pieces up front to make a cup contending group work. Now, again, I know a lot of people are going to start chucking stuff at me because I'm assuming that Nesbitt and Luchenko just don't suck dog food for a living. But there is that possibility because of the talent they have on the wings. But you obviously look at Quinn Hughes, but at this point in time, like, I've been doing this for long enough that I think when there's enough smoke, there's a fire. And it just seems like he is on a war path to get to New Jersey. Like, it's destined at this point. And there is something to be said. Now, look, if you get a guy like Quinn Hughes, that kind of talent, you obviously make an exception, but then you still are in a position where you are an undersized blue line, which is a thing in the NHL any way you want to cut it. And maybe you shift some things around. If you get a Quinn Hughes, assuming you take nothing off your roster, maybe you do like Hughes, Sanheim, York, Bonk, Sealer, Drysdale. Like, I think that's how you would have to kind of structure that defense. But there is the thought that, like, is that a big enough D to sustain playoffs that could get very heavy? And I just don't think that he's going to end up in Philly. It feels like he's destined for New Jersey. So then you move on from that. Dahlin, until further notice, isn't going anywhere. But if you stick with the Buffalo Sabres, even if Kevin Adams sticks around, one of those guys needs to move. And that's Power, Byram, and to a much lesser extent, Matthias Samuelsson. I like the way Matthias Samuelsson plays. And I think that playing with a stud like Dahlin, like he is right now, he's serviceable on a top pair. But he has a lot of injury history. And if you're bringing him in to pair with Jamie Drysdale, is that not just kind of like a younger version of Nick Sealer? Like, it's kind of like you're bringing in an in-house succession plan to Nick Sealer. I like Matthias Samuelsson, but that, to me, you're not shooting high enough. So then you get to Byram and Owen Power. I think it's, objectively speaking, Owen Power is the more talented player. I do know that there is a lot of concern about how soft he plays from people with the Flyers I've spoken to and outside as well. But if you need a power play quarterback, he would fit that bill. He skates like the wind, and he is a tall guy, and he covers a lot of ice. And in today's NHL, you don't need Darian Hatcher on the blue line. You need a guy who could get in lanes, move guys out from the front of the net, and all that. And I think he's on a good contract. He makes, $8.35 million for the next 6 years beyond this one. And then you look at Bowen Byram, who is the guy that presumably wants out. I think he's playing on, or I actually think Power's the one playing on the right side out of position right now in the third pair, and Byram is beside Connor Timmins. Like that, the way that blue line is built in Buffalo is so befuddling to me. But then you look at Bowen Byram, who maybe stylistically is more what they need, and also can play the power play as well. And I do think has a lot of untapped potential. Like, if Bowen Byram was given a chance to be the alpha dog, would he excel in that? And one thing I like about Bowen Byram is that he wants that opportunity. He's hungry for that opportunity. And there's a reason why he only locked himself in on his 2-year contract at 6.25, because he thinks he's better than the way that Buffalo is using him. Now, obviously, the danger with that is you're acquiring a guy that doesn't have that cost certainty. So those are the two guys for me that I think A, will be available eventually, and B, probably wouldn't cost you an arm and a leg. And you're dealing with Kevin Adams, who historically loses every trade he makes. So those are the two guys that I'm looking at. Like, obviously Dahlin's the dream, but I can't see a world barring a full fire sale in Buffalo, that he is available. But I think those are the two most realistic guys that I could see the Flyers targeting. At that point in time, you just have to evaluate which of the two, if either, is a good enough piece to invest in and hope to be that Sanheim plus level guy that you need on the back end.
Yeah, I mean, Power is a guy, a long time, I think, Chef, you might remember a guy named Bob Daly. Bob Daly was the first real puck-moving defenseman the Flyers ever had. They had players like Jim Watson and Tom Bladen, but they weren't the classic puck mover in the mold of Orr or anything, and nor was Bob Daly for that matter. But he was a tall, rangy guy, and the big knock on him is that he was an offensive defenseman who was a little bit softer than the league was used to for a guy of that size and stature. And he came to the Flyers, and he was like the key defenseman for that Cup team or Cup final team in 1980. And a couple of years later, he broke his ankle and his career ended. And that is what led to the Flyers needing to trade for somebody. It ended up being Mark Howe, who was probably the best defenseman in the history of the team. So my point is that Owen Power has the profile and the size. He's already had a 40-point season. He's only 23, and he's locked in. The problem with Byram is he's only good through next year, and then he's a UFA. And if you don't sign him by July 1st, if you acquire him now, for example, before the trade deadline, if I have my timing right, you would have that uncertainty. If he could basically be giving us an audition, and who knows what it would take to acquire him. It would probably take more. You can tell me, Anthony, it would probably take more to acquire Owen Power, but the certainty of him being locked in with that contract until, 2031, to me, it's more attractive, and he probably is a little bit more talented even than Byram. What say you?
Yeah, I mean, like, I'm all about the physicality thing, like 100%. But the way I look at it is, like, I don't think you need a bunch of like mean, rough and tumble guys, because I also think that there is a danger with that, because look at what Toronto did. Like, under Kyle Dubas, they weren't physical and big enough on the back end. And then Brad Treliving, I think, just acquired a bunch of Mike Rathjes. Now they can't move the puck. So it's like, there is a danger with that as well. And I think sometimes you just need rangy guys. Like, you look at, okay, maybe like you had the monster, like, let's say Jeff Petrie, okay? I think Power's more talented than Jeff Petrie, but Petrie wasn't like this mean SOB. He just skated like the wind, and he covered a lot of ice. You just couldn't get around him. And Sanheim is somewhat like that too. Power's bigger than Sanheim. And then if you have Bonk as well, and let's say your bottom pair next year at this time is Sealer and Oliver Bonk, and then you have Sanheim and Power in the top four, maybe that's enough size. Maybe that you're missing a bit of meanness in your top four, but I don't think you need to be mean and gritty and all that. I think you just need to be able to take up a lot of space, get in shooting lanes, get in passing lanes, and be able to box guys out from the middle of the ice. I don't think you just need to be killing people at the blue line all the time, like Risto was doing back in Buffalo. Like, yes, ideally, like if you could have a Shea Weber type, like from 10 years ago on your top pairing, that's the ideal. But you look at a lot of teams, like even the Vegas Golden Knights, they had a big, heavy defense. But was Theodore or Alex Pietrangelo these killers? No, they were just big, rangy guys. Now, they did have some killers like Nick Hague, or I think
and they got rid of him.
McNabb kind of has that mean streak. But if you have, let's say, Sealer doing that, and who knows what Bonk could do, and maybe you keep Risto for another year. Maybe Bonk needs that other year. Or maybe you retain Newt Juleson. If you have that on your bottom pair, and you have like that Andrew Ference, Andrew McQuaid type of third pair like the Bruins did 15 years ago, maybe you could get away with not having the most physical guys in your top four. I think Byram kind of has that mean streak, but he's significantly smaller than Owen Power. So I think that you would really have to be banking on the fact that Power needs a change of scenery. And I've had a head amateur scout tell me recently that like they have killed all of his best assets in Buffalo. to say nothing of the fact that he's playing on the right side on the third pair. Like, how do you want a guy like that to succeed? And you're constantly fighting for power play time with guys like Bowen Byram and Rasmus Dahlin. It is the most redundantly built defensive group I think I've ever seen in the NHL. So, I mean, I would probably lean more towards power because I think you have the potential of a alpha dog on the back end, and you finally would get that power play quarterback. But at the same time, you could make that case for Bowen Byram as well.
Yeah, it's just the contract thing to me is a big deal. That, you know, the Flyers could have that uncertainty, but they're going to go, if such a deal were available, they would obviously, you know, make the choice, the compensation, what would it be worth it? And the Flyers don't lack for anything. Before we get into a full scale targeted, you know, look at the Flyers rebuild versus what maybe some other people are thinking in contrast, I just want to ask you real quickly, any news about Zegras re-signing? And if you haven't heard or anything, what would you think would be the outcome of that?
Well, look, I think Elliot Friedman alluded to it. I had wrote about it a bit at the end of October. I haven't gotten confirmation if they're talking, but when I'm told, I have nothing to comment on that, as opposed to it's flat out no. I think they're talking. There's just no details. The only detail that I could give that I've heard, and it's the same one that I wrote about a month ago, is that the Flyers are going to start at a $6.5–7 million negotiation point. Like, do I think they'll get him at that? No. But I think in the Flyers' mind, they probably want to get him somewhere in the $8–9 million range. And the Zegras camp is probably going to start in the $10 million range. And, you know, like, for me personally speaking, I think 9 is probably where it would end up. Just because if I'm Zegras' agent, I'm saying, like, there's no way in any universe where he's making less than Travis Konecny. There's no way. You gave Travis Konecny, he makes what, 8.75? Mm-hmm. I think that something in the 8 years, $9 million is where it would probably end up. And I know that everyone's going to just start freaking out immediately, but let's actually evaluate what $9 million is going to be. Even right now, what is $9 million right now in the NHL? And a low-end first-line player? Is that what $9 million is? I would say a low-end first-line player.
Yeah, I mean, you got to look at the percentage of the cap. I mean, that's really what it comes down to.
Yeah, so like I always just look at it like I think about across the league what other guys are making, and I'm saying like, okay, what like if Mitch Marner is making 12.5 and Rantanen's making 12.5, and Kaprizov's obviously the outlier for obvious reasons and all that. I'm saying like Trevor Zegras is, in my mind, a low-end first-line player at this point in time. And I think that that's kind of what that $8–9 million is. And even if it isn't that now, in 2-3 years from now, $9 million will probably be like an above-average second-line player. So, I mean, that's where I kind of see this ending up. But that's just me just spitballing and connecting dots more than hearing anything specifically.
Okay. Before we get into the rebuild thing, just a little note here that Guelph will be host city for the Memorial Cup in 2027. And it looks like almost certainly now it would motivate them to load up for assets for 2027, which would mean they would necessarily trade Jet Lachenko, which would probably be a good thing for him. Maybe after the WJC, Jet could be playing with a better squad. It's interesting. Sportsnet had an article about entitled "The 19-Year-Old Who Belongs in the NHL." You know, so yeah, there could be something on that horizon. Chef, any comments? And then we're going to talk about the Flyers rebuild versus what some people are thinking in light of what some of these other teams are doing with the top flight players. You're muted.
Yeah, Lachenko, he's doing what he's supposed to be doing right now. He's playing well. He's just racking up points. It would be nice to see if we could get him a higher class of line mates. I'm not banking on it though. I don't think. I I don't think that's in the cards. I don't know. Maybe they will make a trade, but I don't know much about that whole league down there. But it just everything. It seems like everything we've handled with Luchenko is going like, oh, we should have done this. We could have done this. We shouldn't have signed him to the ELC too early and all that stuff. So I think he's being a little mishandled, and I think he's just going to need extra time anyway. So why get hyper about it right now?
No. I just wanted to pass that along, though, for the people that are wondering if there is any movement on that. It looks like Luchenko more than likely would be dealt as a result of the Memorial Cup awarded to Guelph. So this is a topic that I wanted to hit. It's our final topic of the night. And Anthony, I'm going to open with you. There has been a lot of information out there about some of the pundits, like Elliot Friedman, weighing in about San Jose, Anaheim, and Chicago doing well, having done the tank method, and their young players look like stars, whether it's Leo Carlson for Anaheim, Connor Bedard for Chicago, Macklin Celebrini for San Jose with Will Smith. And like, they're all loaded with all these young kids. They just traded everything. They suffered for like 3 years, and now it's starting to bear fruit. And it looks like it's going to be at a higher level than what the Flyers are capable of with their approach. And Frank Cervelli was recently on Snow the Goalie, echoing sentiments like the Flyers blew it. This is really what they had to do. The Flyers are really going to be in tough. I'm paraphrasing, obviously, to be a cup contender. And it kind of looks like that could be the case. We talked a little bit about, some of the things they need to do to get in that range with defensemen and centers and build around a lot of wingers. Let me get kind of like a synopsis of how you see the situation from where it stands like right now.
Look, I understand, and trust me, I've kept eyes on it too, where specifically with, let's say, Connor Bedard, right, and Chicago, they got that crown jewel and all that. The thing is, guys, is that, like, I don't think it's talked about enough that, like, yes, Chicago and Anaheim particularly are doing really well this season, but if you look at the metrics, like, they are, like, putrid defensive teams that I think have been heavily bailed out by elite goaltending. Mm-hmm. Spencer Knight has probably been the best goaltender in the NHL this season, and Lucas Dostal is like hedging on a top 5 goalie. Now, this is not to say that it takes away all the good that they've done, but if they were not getting elite level goaltending, in spite of them having those elite stars, like, it would probably be a very big different result than what we've seen. I think San Jose has done it the right way a lot, and they have lucked out in terms of some draft picks, but it's also, you luck out by getting the first overall pick, but it's also committing to it. And you've made some really good picks in the way of Will Smith and Sam Dickinson and all that. And I think San Jose, to this point, because of how they've played, in terms of like the analytics and the defensive metrics, I think they are the best example of why a full-scale teardown works. But San Jose was forced to do that. Chicago was forced to do that. They were so good for so long that they had nothing left when they met the end of the road. When Danny Briere and Keith Jones took over, like, this team had already started a rebuild of sorts. Like, I know everyone dunks on Chuck Fletcher because he wouldn't say the word rebuild, although I think that has much more to do with who he was answering to at that time than anything else. But I'm not going to go down a Chuck Fletcher diatribe. He still had Owen Tippett here. You still had Tyson Forster here. You still had already drafted Cutter Gauthier. You still had Bobby Brink. You still had Cam York. Like, they already had a lot of younger pieces that you would have basically been completely trashing their development on. Mm-hmm. You can't just take your entire team and make them garbage. They had to redo, like, Danny Briere and Keith Jones, if they wanted to do it the San Jose, Chicago route, they would have had to unload Tyson Forster, Bobby Brink, Cam York, Cutter Gauthier was traded off, but it's not like Briere and Jones were starting from scratch. It's the same kind of way that like Montreal did it. But Kent Hughes and Jeff Gordon inherited Nick Suzuki and Cole Caulfield and Caden Gooley. They were just benefits of guys that have already having a 1C and a high-end goal scorer in-house. I think you have to look at every situation individually because San Jose and Chicago didn't have a choice. Even Anaheim didn't have a choice. They couldn't do what the Flyers did because they didn't have York and Sanheim and Forster and Brink and Noah Cates and Cutter Gauthier. Like the Flyers already had Cutter Gauthier. They had already started down this rebuilding path, Owen Tippett. So I just have a hard time subscribing to what Frank said because, yes, did it work out to this point specifically for San Jose because I'm not sold on the Ducks or Chicago yet because of the metrics and how much they've been bailed out by elite level goaltending in spite of putrid defensive play? Yes, it has worked out. But how could Danny Briere and Keith Jones have done that? You would have had to gut a decent nucleus of good young players in order to do that because you can't ask players to be bad. Well, just keep them in Lehigh Valley.
Yeah.
So you are bad. You are just going to keep like Forster and Brink and trade off Tippett. And like, it's just that like you would have been like resetting the clock on a rebuild that was already somewhat underway. So like, I see the rationale in it, but I also think that the Flyers are in a much different position than the three aforementioned team that Elliot was referring to.
Now, quick question. Jason Martinez has alluded to it and said it on his podcast on several occasions that, you if you're basically teaching players that losing's okay, that permeates through your organization and you get accustomed to losing and you end up with like horrible situation they had in that locker room before. Do you think that teams that tank, it really affects the other players that have to carry on still and deal with it after the tank is over?
I absolutely do because of a conversation I had earlier this year with Rick Nash. And he told me on the record that he wishes that he could have gotten playoff experience early in his career because by the time he went to the New York Rangers, he didn't know how to win. And I think we could all remember Rick Nash was one of the best forwards in the NHL. He went to the New York Rangers and all of a sudden he just became like lost in a face in the crowd.
Wow.
And I think you've kind of seen that with Timo Meier a bit as well in San Jose, where like he's like this dominant premier forward and he was drafted in 2015. And I don't think he joined. So like by the time he joined the Sharks, I think they were coming off of like being a top tier team, maybe not to the same extent as Rick Nash, but like, I think that there is an inherent benefit to getting that playoff experience that people just poo-poo so much. And like, look at like, okay, it hasn't worked out for the Leafs, but do you think it really benefited a guy like Austin Matthews that he's made the playoffs in every single year since he's joined the NHL? And like, even the Flyers, like, I think that it was very bad development that guys like Ivan Provorov and Travis Sanheim and Shane Gostisbehere and Travis Konechny either didn't make the playoffs or made the playoffs and got shit kicked in the first round. So I just, that comment and look, Rick Nash told me that pertaining to his team and that Columbus is kind of in a similar position to the Flyers where they're trying to do this quasi rebuild and integrate younger players into an already decent nucleus that pre-existed Don Waddell's arrival. But when a guy like Rick Nash tells you that, and then you look at the trajectory of his career, that he was one of the league's most dominant players in the NHL, and then he became just a face in the crowd once he left the Columbus Blue Jackets, I think that there's a lot of validity to that statement.
Wow.
Okay. Why don't we do it this way? Chef, I want you to give your opinion about the Flyers rebuild, what you think, looking at the whole thing, giving your opinion of where they're at versus what maybe they could have done. I'll do the same thing, and then we'll wrap it up for the day.
Cool. All right. So I think what they had before they started, which was a very good point that Anthony made about this retool, rebuild, or whatever, mini rebuild, or whatever we're going to call it. They'll probably end up being a new name for this sort of down the line because you can't all rebuild, retool. But I will say this. I'm satisfied with the results that the Flyers are getting right now. They've shown that with proper structure and the proper systems that they can be competitive. I think the two pieces they are missing is that number one center and that number one D-man. And I don't, and for those who thought about tanking this year, like they're playing too good, they're in the top five. I don't think there's a top five rated center, right? There isn't a center rated in the top five for next year's draft. So it wasn't like you were going to get somebody right away anyway. There might be a D-man in there, but we all know that's 3-4 years away. If you're talking to D-man, very rarely do people pop up like Schaefer, who comes up and it just lights it up. So
yeah,
whatever
Keaton
you were
Verhoff,
getting,
Verhoff, yeah.
what's that? Yeah. So
Keaton
whatever
Verhoff,
you're getting,
think,
yeah, whatever you're getting this year or next draft, you're still all you're doing is delaying your results another 3-4 years, and that doesn't fit the timeline of the players of this core that they have now. So all those guys are going to be in their late 20s by then. So I understand what they're doing. I like what they're doing. I just think that they're going to have to get a little aggressive because I think next year they can compete with, with the other centers like Anthony was talking about in the next 2 years with the ones that are coming up. But that D, they're going to lose some. They're going to have to trade something important to them to get that number one D-man. And that's what the Flyers are going to, especially the fans, the armchair GMs that sit around the league, they're going to be pulling off the Band-Aid off. Oh, you can't trade this person. You can't. But you got to make a move because you're not going to get a number one D without sending a very good player back on that end.
Yeah. And I think like for me, and I'm not saying like everyone says tip it.
I don't think he's going to get it done.
Tip it for me, like even if he is a 25-25 guy, that's a good contract for a 25-25 guy. Mm-hmm. Like personally, like I have no problem with that contract for Owen Tippett. I think that, and like someone pointed out in the mentions when I was talking about the Flyers long-term wingers, I personally think that guy's eventually going to have to be Tyson Forster. I think the Flyers love Tyson Forster, and I think that they view him as a quality piece and a core piece moving forward. But if you have Martone and you have Michkov and you have Zegras, presumably long-term, and you still have Tippett and Konechny and Bobby Brink and even a guy like Alex Bump, Forster, if he's going to get you a guy that you think could be an alpha dog, that's a guy that I would move. And I agree with Chef that, like, in terms of how I feel about the Flyers rebuild or whatever you want to call it, I don't want people to try and burn my house down for calling it a rebuild. Yes. But, like, to this point, it's good. But we've established that you need a big impact move because of this direction. So if we are sitting here next year and they have not done anything, then I'll be like, yeah, they probably F this up.
Yep.
But if you, let's say, like, this is, again, just spitballing completely. If, let's say, between now and next season, you trade Tyson Forster for, let's say, Owen Power and Peyton Krebs, does that change the way you feel about this? Like, and because we're expecting Porter Martone to be here before next season, you're expecting Alex Bump to maybe be here as soon as a winger spot opens up in the top 9. Bobby Brink, I mean, I think that long-term, if he's your third line right winger, you're in a good spot. Long-term, besides Noah Cates, let's say Alex Bump is with those guys, that's your long-term third line. You have Travis Konechny, Porter Martone, Trevor Zegras, Matvei Michkov, and then you bring in Peyton Krebs to be like that fourth line center alongside a Hathaway. And I think Krebs is maybe a centerman that can move up to a third line in a pinch right now. But I mean, again, but you're also getting Owen Power. So I mean,
Yeah, well, that's
again,
it. I mean, yeah. Peyton Krebs, you got dime a dozen. Frankly, I think he stinks, but maybe that's relative to expectation.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
So but look, it would be essentially like Forster for Owen Power, and you'd have to do a deep dive on the analytics, and does it make sense, and blah blah blah. But
Yeah.
I think that's the kind of move that I have to see them gamble on.
Yeah.
Because then if you make a move like that and everything else remains equal, yes, in the interim, you're still you need a top 6 center. Because I think ideally you get a guy who could bump Couturier down to your 3C, to be your 3C, or your 4C rather.
Mm-hmm.
But at least then you still can kind of see a world where it works, but it depends heavily on Jet Luchenko and Jack Nesbitt. But if you if you bring in an Owen Power and you say you are the alpha dog, you're the top pairing guy, you're going to play your strong side, you're going to be the top pairing power play quarterback, and you have Martone join the team and Zegras is locked up and Mitchkov gets on track and you have Bump here and Brink is still here, at least then you could see a path where you could just continue down the same trajectory. Right now, you can't continue down the same trajectory without an outside move because like you guys have alluded to, they don't have that in-house piece on the back end. But what they do have are quality expendable pieces up front to go get that alpha dog if need be.
Yeah, no doubt about that. Yeah, and the UFA market, that whole thing disappeared. And as soon as they were talking about some of the raises in the cap, I could say, well, there goes the UFA market completely. So my feeling is this: when the Giroux era was over, they had the opportunity to do exactly what everybody was talking about. They could have moved on from Couturier. They could have moved on from Konechny because they didn't think that he was really going to be part of the solution. But really, Couturier, once they signed Couturier, boy, they really locked themselves into a player at a bad value contract. Fortunately, we've had an elevation in the cap where it's less painful. That doesn't mean it's not painful at all. You can make the case they would have been better off with a teardown in that scenario back at that juncture. And what are we talking about? We're talking about Fletcher era. But once
5 years ago.
Right. Once we got to the Briere, it's really hard with all the accumulated talent, like Anthony said, for them to just tear it down from there, because then the pain's already been at that point 10 years, and now we're going on further. So
and it's not like they had nothing. They already had quality pieces. That's my point is yes, Briere brought in Mitchkov and you bring in Zegras, but you would basically be telling guys like Cam York, Tyson Forster, Noah Cates, Bobby Brink, Owen Tippett, yo guys, even Carter Hart at that time.
Yeah,
you basically hey guys, I know that you're pretty good and pretty young, but we're gonna stink for 5 years. And then what does that do to their development? Because you get a Macklin Celebrini or a Connor Bedard, maybe, but then all these guys hate their lives. I don't think that we talk about enough that the complacency that set in with guys like Giroux and Voracek and that whole era. Because Ron Hextall was just yo, you guys are top 10 players in the NHL, but we're gonna suck, for the next 3 years. And then it's just that comment that stuck with me for that Rick Nash told me. For me is a very condemning comment of just saying oh, mate, the one of the things that I hate the most is when people are just you either suck or you try and win a cup. You can, if you just make the playoffs and don't get past the second round, what are you doing? It's well, do you live in fantasy world? You think every team is Chicago? I think what Chicago did, where they went from awful to elite to awful, people now have just gone into this vortex where every team can exist there. But a lot of teams will exist in a St. Louis world. I think St. Louis has existed in the most realistic world for the last 15 years, where you hedge on being an elite level cup contender, then you dip for a few years, then you come back up, you win a cup, you stay very good, you miss the playoffs, and you make the playoffs. That's
Boston. Same with Boston.
Yeah, that is probably the new age NHL for a successful franchise, because it's not the way it used to be, where Atlanta and Carolina were going to suck in perpetuity. Like, remember 20 years ago, it was always the same teams that made the playoff. It was always the same teams. It's not that way anymore. So I don't think that you could be like, make the playoffs or fire sale. You can't do that anymore. It's just not feasible.
Now, I think the last comment I want to make is the one other criticism of the Flyers is some of the draft picks. In hindsight, they might have got players out of them. I'm a big believer that Boldy was the pick to make instead of Cam York. Caulfield, he was from that vantage point, he looked like it might only be like a specialty offensive player, where Boldy is that hard to get power forward. He can play all 200 feet and be more of an impact player in the playoffs. I think that was a whiff. I think York is a nice player. And of course, Luchenko, I did not like that pick. I don't like the idea that San Jose went in and scooped up Sam Dickinson, but Dickinson could be a number one defenseman. And they knew that player inside and out. People are probably tired of hearing me say that because he was Bonk's partner for all those years. So you could criticize them also on that point. You can't miss. And the Nesbitt thing, okay, if you're not going to take a center, don't reach for a guy like Nesbitt, and we'll see if it was a reach. We may look back in 2-3 years and say, no, Nesbitt was not a reach. He ended up being taken where he should have been, and in a redraft, he would go right there. So anything else? Because otherwise we're gonna call it right there.
Yeah.
Good, gentlemen? Good. Okay. Look, the Flyers are going to play 4 road games in a row. Tomorrow night at Tampa, Wednesday in Sunrise, Florida, then back-to-back Friday and Saturday versus the Islanders on the island, and a rematch with the Devils. Then they come back on next Monday. That would be December 1st against Pittsburgh at home, Buffalo at home. That would be the 3rd. And then on the 4th, on the Thursday, we'll have a special show for you. So we're going to miss time because I'm going to be on the road. Of course, the great Dan Silver's on the road. And all we can do is wish everybody a happy Thanksgiving and go from there. So, Anthony, you're at... Yeah, definitely. American Thanksgiving is not the same as Canadian Thanksgiving, of course.
Yeah, that's true.
People can find your work at Daily Faceoff and where esse?
Yeah, that's pretty much it these days. This is the first podcast I've done in quite some time, actually. But yeah, dailyfaceoff.com. Every Tuesday, every Friday, I have a story that drops, and Tuesday is usually the Flyers-centric article. So for fans of this podcast, that's where I guess that's the day that you want to keep an eye out for.
Gotcha. People can follow you on X at A DiMarco 25, right?
Exactly, guys.
You got it. You can follow the great Dan Silver at DSilver88. And Chef, your handle on X?
Chef to the left B on X, Chef to the left B.
Yeah, and you can follow the O&B Puckcast at O&B Puck at O&B Puck. We're also on Getter at O&B Puckcast. Of course, you can follow the O&B Puckcast on several podcast platforms: Apple, Spotify, iHeart, TuneIn, Amazon Audible. Of course, we have YouTube, which hopefully you're watching right here. If not, all the other podcast platforms. We have a Facebook page. Just type in there O&B Puckcast. It'll pop right up for you. And if you follow or subscribe, it really does help us move us up the charts when people are looking for Philadelphia Flyer podcast. So that's all we have for you today. So have a great Thanksgiving. Thanks for listening, and go Birds. Take care.